Monday across the country, pro-Palestinian protesters blocking roadways, including in Chicago, for people trying to make flights at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Some were late, some missed their flights entirely. Then you had tape being revealed from over the weekend in the Chicagoland area of organizers for protesters to the DNC teaching people how to chant "Death to America" and "Death to Israel" in Farsi. So what does this portend for what could happen at the Democratic National Convention come August? These issues being discussed over the past couple of days, and to give you some of that here with Bishop on Air, I'm Greg Bishop. Thanks for taking time. Like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. So they had conversations about hate speech at the Capitol. You had conversations about squatting at the Capitol, and even back and forth from gun control groups and law enforcement groups about a measure to allow for cold cases to be reopened at the request of victims' families. But let's start with the hate speech aspect here. Governor J.B. Pritzker on Monday in Chicago was asked about, well, that morning, protesters, pro-Palestinian protesters protesting and blocking roadways.
Well, first of all, I support the idea that people should, express their First Amendment rights and protest if they would like to. I do not think that they should be disruptive of the traffic of people trying to get from one place to another. I think they can have their voices heard and let people move along their day. And I'm convinced that law enforcement ought to make sure that those byways and highways are open for people and still be respectful of those protests.
So State Representative Dan Ugasti from Geneva, if you go to thecentersquare.com/Illinois, you'll see the headline here. ADL, chance of death to America, troubling protests ahead of the DNC. So you've got State Representative Dan Ugasti, who's actually proposed to have this be illegal. You've got a statement that he released. Let me see if I can pull this up here, where he spells out that he wants this to be made illegal. So the announcement of an intention to file legislation to criminalize such activity, saying first responders should not have to face such barriers when responding to emergency calls. It's time to criminalize this activity, Ugasti said, and bring greater charges to those committing these acts, especially when putting others in harm's way. Our first responders cannot be delayed in this manner. And even to the response that the governor gave, Ugasti said that he was disappointed in that response, saying we do not have to be respectful of protesters who break the law. The governor should act swiftly and justly, sending the state police to physically remove these individuals. And it's being reported that about 40 individuals were arrested Monday. But what does this possibly mean for the DNC coming up in Chicago this August?
As you know, the state's not in charge of that permitting process. And again, I respect people's right to protest. I also respect people's right to come to the convention and be able to get where they want to go without having to be greeted with, people yelling at them as they're walking to the convention hall. Having said that, again, First Amendment rights are, immutable, and we ought to be protecting those wherever we can.
So you also have
just this past
the
week,
Anti-Defamation League's David Goldenberg. He was at the Capitol yesterday talking about hate speech spiking quite a bit, especially anti-Semitism spiking quite a bit since the Hamas attack on Israel in October. But he also talked about those chants that were being circulated online, video showing people being trained to chant certain things.
And just this past weekend in Chicago, organizers of protests for this summer's DNC were caught on video teaching participants to chant "Death to Israel" and "Death to America" in Farsi. The trauma and concern in the Jewish community is palpable. I think it's problematic, right? I think that if that's what's coming, right? Those who have protested in the streets, who have led anti-Israel, anti-Zionist protests, have made abundantly clear that they're telegraphing it very clearly that the DNC is their ultimate target, right? Things like Genocide Joe and Genocide Jill, categorizing them as that, refusing to meet with the administration, along those lines, right? So we're seeing that, we're hearing it, that organizing, while, and in a lot of the media coverage, even if you say, like, yes, you had people that were anti-capitalist or anti-whatever it was at various things this weekend, they also made it really clear that the driving force behind this organizing event was Israel-Gaza. And so if that's what's being taught, and if that's what's being encouraged, and that's what's not being categorically rejected by, like, every elected official, by every organization, like, they're calling for death of America, right?
So clearly there's ongoing concerns about what this spells out for the Democratic National Convention in Chicago this August. So we'll be watching that space. But some other things that were happening yesterday at the state capitol. You had gun control advocates there who were rallying to essentially bring about a new law that would allow for homicide cases that are cold to be brought back out. Katrina Peterson, reporter with the Center Square, talked with State Representative John Cabello, who is a current law enforcement officer and a former detective as well. And he talked about how requiring cold cases to be reopened at the request of a victim's family could run into some tough spots, especially with law enforcement that continue to be strained by increased regulations from the state government.
I understand what he's trying to do, and it's honorable what he's trying to do to help these folks that tragically lost somebody in a violent homicide. But if there's no new evidence, if there's no new information, there's nothing more for the police departments to do. I believe in the bill it says that if you have 60 homicides, you need an officer for each 60 homicides. There could be the size of Rockford. I mean, we usually have anywhere between 30 to 40 some. We could have one that's over 60. We don't have the manpower to be able to do that. I don't believe Chicago has the manpower to do this.
So clearly a lot of questions about State Representative Cam Buckner's bill to allow for cold cases to be reopened after a certain process with the victims' families involved. Law enforcement groups like the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police, the Illinois Sheriff's Association, State Representative John Cabello, law enforcement officer, they're pushing back on this idea. But again, the gun control groups at the Capitol yesterday rallied with some state legislators pushing for this, like State Representative Maura Hirschauer, and Katrina Peterson touched a base with her about this particular bill.
That is city, suburban, rural.
Respectfully, we have heard from constituents across the state, some of them here today at this rally, who have a different experience than that, who feel left out, who feel like there is more work to be done. And I think if we can work together with law enforcement to give them the tools and the technology, a lot of times that's funding we need to work on, to make them feel as though they can provide these services for victims and their families, we'll get there. I know that Representative Buckner is working really hard on negotiations there, and I feel like we all have the same aim, which is solving crimes, interrupting the cycle of violence, and keeping our communities safe. I believe we can get there to a compromise, and we have to, because we've heard from victims across the state that unsolved homicides not only are they painful for families, but they perpetuate the cycle of violence. So this is a huge step in ending gun violence. Absolutely not. I mean, you've heard these cold cases are from years, some of them decades ago. So, we're just, working together to move forward and help victims.
So that's a measure that has yet to fully advance. We'll see exactly where that goes. But gun control groups on the ground yesterday in Springfield. Tomorrow is the Illinois Gun Owner Lobby Day at the Capitol. And you're expecting to see potentially thousands of people there with the Illinois State Rifle Association and other gun rights groups. So we'll definitely be tracking that. But late yesterday in a Senate committee, something else came up that's one of those headline stories that leads to legislators trying to correct things, and it deals with squatters. State Senator Dave Severson from the Rockford area, he proposed a measure that would allow for law enforcement to have more power to go after squatters. And this is, again, another story you'll be able to read at thecentersquare.com.
Stories like Susan and Joe Landa, who bought a home for their disabled son who was autistic. They were so excited, looking forward to the first time that their son was going to be able to move out and live in a home. On moving day, they went to the home, and there was someone living there. The police were called. In the end, it turned out to be a dispute, and so they had no other choice but to go home and spend thousands of dollars in the next 4 months just to try to get into their own home. In many cases, seniors who are victimized by this. So doing nothing is going to continue, or a growing number of victimizing seniors.
And this is a measure that actually passed unanimously out of that Senate committee, a Republican bill. We'll see if it advances in the Illinois Senate and gets over to the House and track that as well. This, as you had other states like Florida recently enact similar legislation. So that's just a sampling of some of the stuff you'll find at thecentersquare.com. Please go check that out. Regularly throughout the day, you'll be able to see headlines and updates of what's going on at the State House and around Illinois. Again, thecentersquare.com/Illinois, but that's not the only place we've got coverage. You can go and check out all of the other states at thecentersquare.com, including national coverage from out of Washington, D.C. All right, have yourselves a great day. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell with Bishop on Air.